are here with Books and Beer. Once again, we're meeting with Jay Palmer, and today we'll be discussing his newest book, Viking Daughter, which I'll be asking about after this brief. Jay Palmer, is Viking Daughter real?
Viking Daughter is not fantasy. Viking Daughter is historical fiction based upon the Norse sagas. Now, Hávi was a teenage girl living on her parents' goat ranch when a visiting dignitary came to negotiate with her clan chief over whose fleet their men were going to join for the summer Viking. Now, her clan chief wasn't happy about how negotiations were going, so he told the dignitary, well, your wife died a month ago. Tell you what, you marry one of our girls, we'll call this deal done. And this wizened old man, long gray beard, looks across at this group of teenage girls and says, I'll take the tall blonde. And this was how Hávi was forced to get married. She tried to refuse to get married, only to find out that women at the time didn't have the legal right to refuse a marriage. Like it or not, Hávi was forced to marry him, only to find out that the man she just married was the leader of the largest clan in Sweden. And Hávi went from milking goats every morning to sitting on the first throne she had ever seen in the largest village she had ever seen, in a castle that she'd never seen. The historical aspects of what happens to her and the world that she exists in is very well researched and it's very well documented. The actual story of Hávi, did she exist? Was her name something else? We don't know, but we do know that women had to have someone, some group, some impetus that started them down the path to gaining unprecedented legal rights, which we know that women gained in the 8th century.
Were women really in charge in the Viking Age?
Technically, no. But for 4 months out of every year, for 300 years, half the men in Scandinavia would get on their ships and go Viking, and leaving 3/4 of the population of Scandinavia as women. Now, there were some households where men were set up, but not all of them. Women were running the shops. Women were running the ranches, women were running the farms, and yes, in some cases, women were running the clans. Now, we know this because we know that women did have a lot of legal authority, and we know from other sagas that women had position and power even at that age. But transferring that over into legal rights was a whole other issue, and that took a lot of work for the women to do.
Hávi is very strong for a woman from the Dark Ages. Is she realistic?
I specifically made Hávi to be raised by women. Her father had been lost in a Viking expedition years before, and her grandfather lived on her farm, but he was senile and couldn't even speak anymore. But they meticulously took care of his health because he was a man, and therefore they were allowed to own the farm through him. If he had died, one of the women there would have had to have married just to bring a man to the ranch, because otherwise, after 3 months, a woman who was unmarried and there was no man in the family would lose all her property to her clan chief. And this is the type of situation that women frequently faced in the Viking Age. By the end of it, there were more widows than wives in most of Scandinavia, and they had to be strong enough to face the legal realities and yet not overstep them. But we do know Leif Erikson's daughter, for example, picked up an axe and murdered a boatload of people just so that her husband could claim ownership of the largest ship in their fleet. This is the type of women that actually existed in what we know as the closest thing to historical documents that existed in the 8th century.
There's a lot of sex in the Viking daughter. Was that common for a woman of the period?
You know, this is a touchy subject. If you were born of the lower classes, if your mother was a whore, chances are all of her daughters were whores. Well, and this was, a lot of people followed the lines of their maternal as well as their paternal parent. And for the nobility, their daughters were spared this. Some were actually kept in pretty much, protective isolation their whole lives. But for the average woman, the daughter of the farmers, the warriors, the merchants, they're pretty much like women of today. They fought against their restrictions of their parents, and they did whatever they could and got away with whatever they could. So,
would you say that this book should be inspirational to women?
Well, I certainly hope that it is. When I was growing up as a very young man, back in the 60s and 70s, feminism was a topic on every talk show almost daily, and women were very vocal about it, a lot more vocal than they are now. Even if it hasn't died so much, it's not as visible in our culture, but a lot of the strides that they made back when I was younger paused and didn't seem to come to completion of what they actually wanted. And yes, I would like for my book to inspire women to move on to claim their legal rights and their legal status, both in the courtrooms and, if necessary, in the protest marches.
Well, thanks for being here today, Jay Palmer. This is Haley Dawson, and this has been another episode of Books and Beer. Good night.